Good afternoon and welcome back to the 22nd Annual CERIAS Security Symposium live from Purdue University. Our final panel discussion is an outgrowth of a LinkedIn exchange that I witnessed and joined between a couple of our longtime board members and friends of CERIAS that of course is very timely right now. Our Ransoming America panelists are Simon Hunt, the Executive Vice President for Cyber Product Innovation at MasterCard, Wisniewski, the Principal Research Scientist at Sophos, Aravind, Machiry, Electrical Computer Engineering faculty here at Purdue University, and Santiago Torres, Arias, also a Electrical Computer Engineering faculty member here at Purdue University. Today's moderator is Professor Tahir, who is a professor in the Computer and Information Technology Department of the Purdue Polytechnic. Tahir, the video is yours.
Thank you so much. Welcome to the last but not least panel this year on ransomware. It is my honor to be the moderator of the panel. I look forward to working with you all. In the first 5 minutes, I will have an opening statement and will introduce my panelists. And after that, I will invite each panelist to give 2 to 3 minutes position statement on ransomware. And panelists will have 30 minutes questions and answer session with the moderators. And then at the end, we'll take questions from audience in the last 15 minutes. So let me start with the definition of ransomware. According to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency definition, ransomware is an ever-evolving form of malware designed to encrypt files on a device, rendering any files in the system that rely on them unusable. Malicious actors then demand ransom in exchange for this decryption. So this is the definition of ransomware. Ransomware impacts business processes and leave organization without the data they need to operate and deliver mission-critical services. In the recent Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, the victims were not just Colonial Pipeline company, which paid the requested ransom, but also ordinary gas consumers, like many of us who experienced long line and higher price at gas station. Ransomware as a type of cyber malware is not technically new. There have been many research and development efforts in the past decade to address ransomware detection, prevention, investigation, and recovery. However, ransomware attacks seem to be trending upward in recent years. This indicates that defense against ransomware is not just a technical problem. Instead, it is a challenge that needs to be addressed from multiple fronts. For example, technology, policy, international politics, finance and insurance, education, workforce development, and public awareness. These challenges make today's panel a very timely one. We have invited panelists from cybersecurity industry, financial institution, and academia to talk about ransomware from multiple angles. So let me first introduce our honorable panelists. Simon Hunt, Executive Vice President of Cyber Product Innovation at MasterCard. Simon has been a leader in the cybersecurity space for more than 20 years, widely recognized as an industry speaker and seasonal entrepreneur. He previously served in executive technology roles at McAfee, Intel, and most recently as the Chief Technology Officer at the data protection firm WinMagic. My next honorable panelist is Chester Wisniewski, Principal Research Scientist as Next Generation Security Leader, Sophos. With more than 20 years of professional experience, Chester analyzes the massive amount of attack data gathered by Sophos Lab to distill and share relevant information in an effort to improve industry understanding of evolving threats, attackers' behavior, and effective security defenses. My third honorable panelist is Santiago Arias, Assistant Professor of ECE from Purdue. His research area is systems security, and he is widely known for his work in end-to-end software supply chain security. The last panelist is Aravind Machiry, Assistant Professor of ECE from Purdue. His research area is system security, and he is widely known for his work on discovering and mitigating vulnerabilities in computer systems. Now I would like to invite each panelist to give a 2-3 minute position statement on ransomware. Let's start with Simon Hunt.
Hi. So I think, as many of you know, my role in MasterCard is to protect our franchise. So I am deeply interested in anything that affects the world's banks, the world's merchants, the world's card process from acting properly, because it affects us as society. I think we all intrinsically know that all the losses in the merchants and the stores and the banking system, that changes the price of goods and services that we buy. So all those costs affect us individually. So this is a deep problem. My position is that ransomware is just another form of malware. All the same tactics that we've been dealing with for the last 30 years of stopping malware are the tactics that stop ransomware. You know, at the simplest state, ransomware is, how do I get somebody to click something, how do I get a computer to run a program? All the things that stop that happening stop ransomware. The reason ransomware is particularly evil is it's directly funding the global cybercrime industry. It's $5.2 trillion, I think, is today's number. 40% of that money, we know, thanks to the research happening in places like University of Surrey, 40% of the money gets plowed into further crime, to gun trafficking, human prostitution, international terrorism. It's funding huge social evils. And to wrap up my position, I am deeply worried that companies feel that they can buy their way out of a ransomware problem by funding the very criminals who will then use that money to attack another victim. I am deeply concerned of that behavior. And I'll pass the baton.
Thank you so much, Simon Hunt. So next is, I would like to invite Chester Wisniewski.
Thank you, Tahir. Building on what Simon said, of course, his organization, MasterCard, is part of the traditional financial system. And until Bitcoin, ransomware really couldn't get a foothold as the kind of problem it is now, because the traditional financial system shuts this stuff down. And if we go back, I mean, ransomware, the first ransomware was in 1989. It never really went away. But the problem with perpetrating the crime was collecting the money. Like, you couldn't collect millions of dollars the way you can now. And, criminals used premium rate SMS in Russia to do ransomware crimes. We've seen gift cards being used, but it was all small scale stuff. You're talking $50 gift cards, $25 here, $100 on a premium rate SMS phone call to unlock your bootloader, this kind of thing, all the way up until Bitcoin in 2008. And at that time, the companies like MasterCard and Visa and American Express were helping us combat other scam crimes like fake antivirus and things where they were trying to use the traditional payment processing networks, but they kept getting stomped out because they couldn't process credit cards. And you can't convince grandma to buy Windows Antivirus 2008 for $99 if she can't pay for it with Visa and MasterCard, right? So the criminals were really struggling on processing the payments until Bitcoin. And so I think it's very difficult to talk about ransomware without talking about, I don't want to call it anonymized payment technologies, but with it, blockchain decentralized payment technologies that have no ability to claw back money, no ability to really meaningfully apply financial regulations by design. And that really changed these crimes, right? Because the amount of money funneling into the system when it was $99 a victim and $200 a victim, and or for that matter, 75 cents a victim if you're talking about selling computers for spam bots and things like this that occurred so much through the early 2000s and 2010s, completely transformed when suddenly the same effort to commit the crime could yield $2, $3, $10 million. Or even tens of thousands of dollars in the smaller attack cases. So that's been the transformative thing. And as much as technology is a part of this, we have to try to look at the financial side of it as well, because there's never going to be a network that has no vulnerability to someone getting a basic foothold in. And that doesn't mean we can't defend ourselves, but applying that ubiquitously across all organizations in the world is unrealistic. We need to take the approach of limiting their opportunity technically and limiting their opportunities financially in order to try to get a grasp on this.
Thank you so much. The next, I will invite Santiago, Arias.
Right, and I'll build on everything that has been spoken about so far, although from a different perspective. I'm more of an academic. we did mention that ransomware, technically speaking, is mostly an unsophisticated type of attack that was dated almost 40 years ago. And the fundamental mechanisms that make this work haven't really changed throughout the years. My position is that even though this is a fact, it doesn't really surface the real problematic, which is we're identifying how vulnerable the whole software ecosystem is as a messy interconnected network of actors and technical elements. And I think this is where we are really falling short. We are not going to be plugging a hole like ransomware if we don't understand that there's a critical cyber infrastructure out there that really doesn't have any sort of a compliance requirements followed, or like the proper mechanisms set in place, or even a vision of a nationwide position to react to ransomware as a commitment. Say in the same way that the zero tolerance policies were enacted on, say, terrorism or many acts of that nature. I'm also trying to bring in the notion of after colonial pipeline and SolarWinds. The executive order, I think it's 14028, really tries to set forth a new way to address these problems that us as academics, as practitioners, need to start thinking about how this is not an isolated problem of, oh, let's shut down their payment networks, or let's come up with better signatures for antiviruses, but rather, how can we develop an ecosystem in which we are as fundamental as the power grid, as fundamental as the oil pipelines, and really start treating all these interconnected systems as something that can really cause large amounts of damage to the nation's fabric.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite Aravind Machiry. Position statement.
Hey Tahir. As Tahir mentioned before, I work on system and software security. So my interest in ransomware is basically IoT ransomware. So like the traditional ransomware we have been dealing with, or like the ransomware, like high profile ransomware are all desktop machines, and they take control of this high profile data by encrypting or shutting down the system or locking the system. Whereas in IoT space, the impact is much severe, right? Like we could have, like we have straight access to the physical world, and we may get locked out of our house, or the baby monitor might get turned off, and the ransom can be demanded where there's a high chance of hit rate because now it's your life in question. And so my work is developing new hardware assisted techniques, like by using trusted execution environment to detect and prevent these ransomware attacks. So specifically, we can actually see that most of the IoT devices are communicated through smartphone. So can we make sure that all the physical actions that the firmware does on an IoT device is through a smartphone? So having this trusted chain on the physical activities done by IoT devices as a way to prevent ransomware attacks on IoT devices is my main area of research. And I'm also interested in what Santiago mentioned about the patching practices or the security of infrastructure that have been used in the organizations, right? Can we have a common baseline, or can we even have a evaluation metric to know how secure the systems are and how secure are the machines that hold critical infrastructure is? Or can we shift the critical data to another infrastructure where we have much more patched machines? Because most of the ransomware attacks, they use one-day vulnerabilities, right? And the fact that these ransomwares have an easy way to entry just because some organizations don't apply patches on time, it's really worrying. So my idea is to understand what makes these organizations not apply those patches on time, and how can we improve it?
Well, thank you so much for the position statement. Now I have a number of questions to ask panelists for their comments and advice. Despite advances in ransomware research and development, why do ransomware attacks keep coming back? Is it because of the more advanced attack strategies and tactics, or slow progress in deploying ransomware defenses? As Simon said before, that we have seen the first malware in I believe it's 1989. So after that, now we're in 2021. Since then, have we not done enough to stop all those ransomware attacks? So I would like to invite Simon to comment on this question.
I think we're just really bad at cybersecurity. If I look at and Chester, I think we'll have some much better data here. So Chester, I'll set this up for you. But the attacks that I see are password stuffing, phishing, and patching. I'm not saying everyone falls victim to that. There are certainly some targeted, dedicated attacks against large organizations where criminals put time and effort into investigation, doing the due diligence, understanding how to penetrate before they launch the attack. But most companies, like I think about Lewiston, for instance, the city of Lewiston, it was password stuffing. If I think about, I can't remember the name of the city, but there was another city more recently, it was phishing. So really basic stuff. And if I send you an email saying, hey, click here to encrypt everything on your computer, I bet like 1 out of 100 people will click it. If I call it click here to see puppies, I'll get 10 out of 100 people to click it. We are just lousy at the basics right now. And the criminals know it. The criminals can do global scale tracking of vulnerabilities. They know everybody's username and password from all the breaches, and they can just push a button and trigger that and reel us in. So that's my opinion. But I would leave it to Chester, who no doubt will have numbers.
Okay.
Thanks, Simon. I don't know if I have hard numbers, but I mean, we did a outside survey commissioned by like real survey people, not just like customers of ours kind of thing, of 4,500 organizations in January, and 37% of them had fallen victim to some sort of a ransom attack in the last year, which is an astounding number when you consider that this was across all industry bases, all verticals, et cetera. And while it varied by vertical, I mean, healthcare and local government and education were harder hit than media and technology and some other verticals. The fact of the matter is it didn't vary much. I mean, it was literally well over a third for every single sector. And then 47% of those that were attacked were successful in defending themselves, meaning they were able to stop it before the files were encrypted or the data was stolen. So that's good. I mean, it's bad. It's only less than half, but it's good in that the previous year it was only 20%. So we went from 20 to 47% in a year of organizations that were starting to be better at defending themselves after the attacker got a foothold. But that getting the foothold to what Simon's talking about is the problem. It's just, I mean, it's astonishing. There's not a lot of skill involved. Of the last 3 victims I talked to that used our rapid response service, one of them the criminal got in through a 10-year-old unpatched Cold Fusion server. So not a year out of date, not a month out of date, 10 years out of date. Another one, the infrastructure the criminals got into was in their Windows Server environment, and they had our software on all of their endpoints. They had our software on all of their servers, but it was turned off on the servers. So not only were we not able to protect them, but on top of that, that meant Windows Defender was disabled. So it's even worse than not having anything on there at all, because if you load a security tool and you set the policy to null, you've actually reduced the security of Windows and the security tool, because now you've got nothing. And this is the part of the issue is it's the ubiquity of policy, right? You can have 10,000 computers and 9,800 of them can be in perfect condition. It's not that we don't have the technology to stop ransomware from encrypting computers. It's been around for a long time, and we're all actively developing pretty good, sophisticated stuff. I've seen great papers in academia about things that work very similar to things that we're doing. The solution's there. It's just it has to be everywhere. And if the servers where all the crown jewels are held are the one unprotected asset, that's kind of a giant problem. And for another presentation I'm doing yesterday, I spent the day on the dark web looking at what are called initial access brokers, people who get that initial foothold and then sell the victim onto a criminal to be ransomed. And this, the one forum I logged into yesterday had 12,000 open RDP accounts for sale for between $5 and $12 each. I could pick by industry, by country, by IP address, by provider, which victim I wanted. And so when it's that easy, it's not even about phishing. I mean, certainly phishing is another vector, But the vast majority of this is unpatched firewalls, unpatched VPN, open RDP access to the internet. And I don't need to even, I don't even need to scan the internet to find victims. I could just go to someone else and pay them $6 and they'll hand me one.
Oh, that's really interesting information. Because that's most of the time it happens, because sometimes like we have all those tools available, all of the products are already there, but somehow they are disabled, or maybe they're not working, they're not functioning, or maybe sometimes we have a greater system available, but those are not patched. Sometimes like we always spend hundreds of dollars to buy a new laptop or buy a new computer, but we cannot buy a software to like antivirus software, and to put it on there. So thank you so much. Next, I will go to Santiago for.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what's been said. I was very surprised earlier on. I did some investigation about the configure. It is not a piece of ransomware, but it was essentially a botnet. And I remember how surprised I was to see that it was like on the top 10 malware families for a bunch of decades. But you look at the underlying CVE that's used to spread it, and it's a CVE from 2008. That's widely documented, that's widely patched by Windows, and it just so happened that this thing was still spreading like wildfire. So it is true that there's an issue of propagating patches, and it is interesting also to consider, because Microsoft itself, they define like the Patch Tuesday methodology. They're somewhat like the gold standard of trying to propagate patches fast, but it still happens that there are systems out there that are unpatched. And what Chester was saying, that, well, you can have 10,000 hosts, but it just takes one for you to lose. I think part of what's missing here is the ways to assess this sort of vulnerability surface. I think or mechanisms to assess the security of our network are not entirely mature, and they're generally meant to look at a compositional analysis, right? Is this host safe? Is this host safe? Is this host safe? What are my like open ports? Is there like an open RDP port here and there, as Chester mentioned? But there's no way to actually holistically look at a deployment and also understand in a semi-automatic way to say, hey, this happens to be an oil pipeline. We need to take a different approach to this. And I think part of it is also, and I don't want to get too far ahead, but it also seems to me that we're on a hard lack of like security professionals on some of these pieces of infrastructure. Nobody actually thought of this because maybe there wasn't somebody to raise these concerns in some of these incidents.
Well, thank you so much. Now, Aravind, Machiry.
Hey, yeah, I mean, like everybody, like they raise very valid points. I echo with everyone. It's the same thing. And it's interesting to know like why these organizations don't follow like this common sense security practices, right? Like what made them not to patch these like 10-year-old CVE? What made them not to patch this vulnerability that was 2008? Do they discard the patches? Because Microsoft actively pushes patches, like on Patch Tuesday, you actually get the notification very bright and in front of you, and it's very annoying. It's hard to escape that warning, and still like organizations tend to miss it. I want to understand like why is like irrespective of all the notifications, all the education, like everything that we do, why is it not reaching the end users? I don't know. Like, I think that is more interesting than, I mean, it's easy to say, okay, they don't apply these common sense practices, but I believe these developers are not like, they're not naive. They kind of know what it takes, but the fact that they're not applying them, it's interesting. I want to understand like why, especially with victims, like why were the practices not followed? Like what are their practices? Like why is it the case that the 10-year-old CVE is not patched, right? So
I think it's incredibly easy to stand up infrastructure, easier than it has ever been, and no easier to maintain it. Like anyone in this call could go stand up a Windows server on Amazon with a credit card. In fact, you wouldn't even need a credit card. 10 minutes later, you can have it stood up.
Mhm.
How many of us actually know how to patch and maintain and correctly configure that asset? We've been given a great power, and
Uh-huh.
we lack the skill to look after it.
Yeah,
Look,
but I thought it
in
was
the
like,
enterprise environments, it's about customization, right? You look at this Cold Fusion server, and I didn't go into the details with this particular client, but I suspect based on previous experience that they heavily customized their custom code on top of the platform that they purchased. And then if they apply, every time they go to apply a patch, it breaks their entire website. And it's an important e-commerce platform for their organization. And so their tendency is to either never patch or to take an incredibly long time at change control of testing those patches because of the customization involved. And if you look at what most enterprise companies are doing these days, like we have a whole team of full-time developers, all they do is build Salesforce stuff for us. So if Salesforce makes a major API change, it's a gigantic nightmare because we've literally got 15 man years of code laying on top of Salesforce. And so when you look at things like Windows patches, Microsoft's shipped several duds over the last couple of years that have blown up machines and blue screened them. So companies get hesitant. They're like, whoa, 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 we're waiting at least 30 days until we see if everybody else blows up before we're going to let it blow up in our environment. So part of this is the software industry's fault. We don't deliver reliable enough patches and consistent APIs that don't change so that organizations that need all this custom software can reliably build it and still consume our patches. We're instead wanting to push our newest, latest thing and a new API to support all this crazy new stuff we've developed, except that then creates breakage, right? So there's responsibility on both sides of this, I think, between independent software vendors and consumers of that software. And certainly enterprises, I feel, are doing their customizations much more carefully so they don't end up in these situations now. But you're trying to undo 25, 30 years of software development to move forward for any large, complicated organization, and that's really tough.
And I think some of that, if I may, almost like put words in your mouth, I think it has to do with the fact that there's not a lot of accountability when somebody gets hacked. I don't want to get too far ahead in the conversation, but most of these attacks are all very uninteresting. Like you look at Equifax, it was an Apache struct vulnerability. It was something that people were talking about, and it just took apparently one person to go like, oh, I wonder if this website does have that. Or just use an automated scanner or something like this. Now, I don't know, and I'm not trying to say like, hey, we should like put out our pitchforks and go down like whatever Equifax is physically at, but I wonder what is the expectation that we should be having when, again, the oil pipelines are really dependent on software nowadays. There's this old quote, and I forget it was who said it, but it used to say that if we build buildings like we write source code, the buildings will be brought down by a woodpecker, right? It is pretty much that.
Well, thank you so much for answering this question. With the discussion, it seems like we need to patch our system. We need to make sure that we can identify phishing emails. From the company perspective, we need to make sure that they are up to date on their softwares, and also like any of the tools that available in machines, they're supposed to be in functioning, and they must be functioning. It's pretty surprising that like 40%, 47% were able to defend the attack. And it means the 53% were not able to detect the attack. And it means like if I'm one of those 53%, that's really big, large number. And that's kind of connected with the second question. So my second question is, in your opinion, what are some of the most effective defense against ransomware attacks? Do you guys have any suggestion how the people, like for example, the 53%, they were not able to defend themselves from these attacks? What's your thought on?
I guess I'll start since it was my number I threw out there. But what the biggest difference between the successful and the unsuccessful amongst those that I talk to is those that are acknowledging they can't prevent, which means they have an active process of monitoring and threat hunting. Like they understand that they are probably not fully patched, even if they intend to be. There's going to be computers that got missed. There's going to be reasons that certain ones couldn't be updated and that they may have some mitigation in place. And so the companies that are smart enough to recognize that protection isn't 100%, no matter what antivirus or firewall or whatever stuff I buy, things are going to happen. And when I hear the burglar break in the glass at the front window of the house, I need to go investigate it. And if I investigate it, it means, yeah, I was compromised by a ransomware criminal. But the ransomware criminal is a human being, right? These aren't automated attacks. I mean, Santiago's comment on Configure, I mean, I could go on for hours. It's a fascinating piece of malware. The very first malware to ever employ RC6 encryption, even before Ron Rivest was able to implement it. Fascinating stuff. But the thing is, Configure was automated, right? Configure was a worm that spread through a vulnerability in RPC. And when we're talking about ransomware, it's human operated. So we've got this advantage, right? The criminal actually takes a few days, on average 7 to 10 days, the criminal's in your network before they trigger the ransomware, right? Because they got to find all the servers that have the valuable assets, and they got to copy all the data off, and they got to try to delete your backups and do all these things to trip you up along the way so you can't recover. So there's a really good chance they can get their money. And if it takes them a week from that first alarm that comes into the security tools you have, if you're monitoring, you got a whole week to find them and evict them from your network, right? So those 47%, they're watching and they went, huh, that's weird. That doesn't look like it's supposed to be happening. I'm going to go talk to Josh and see if he opened an attachment. And the organizations that just let the feeds fly by and are in reactive mode, if a user calls and says, I have a problem, they help them, but they're not looking proactively to see and investigate alerts. Those are the ones that are 53%, in my opinion.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Simon?
Yeah, I think, as Chester says, that catching people during the reconnaissance phase, absolutely. If you're sophisticated enough to do that, that's really great. Otherwise, the recovery is the key thing. And a common situation with people who pay or really suffer downtime because of ransomware is they say, well, we didn't have a robust backup strategy. And if you think about, a decade ago, when you got malware on your computer, you'd pick it up, you'd take it to the IT guy and say, I've got malware. He wouldn't try and fix it. He'd just give you another computer. Like, oh, I'll just wipe it and start again. Now the problem is the ransomware is going off your computer into the other parts of the network. It's doing the traversal. So I encourage small companies, especially, play the game. Everyone comes to work and you say, the building burnt down. What do we do? Because ransomware is burning of your IT infrastructure, burnt to the ground. Like, who has a backup at home? Who has the tape? Who has the disks that were offline? Yeah, what is the strategy? And that's where you start, is your ability to recover from a devastating cyber attack is much the same as recovering from a fire in your building. What plans do you have? Have you taken that seriously? So as Chester says, like, catch it during reconnaissance. Have your AV or your protections running everywhere, know the scope of your attack surface, and have a plan for if you miss something, how is it not going to be business devastating?
One thing I want to add to what Simon said is we've noticed organizations in hurricane zones, earthquake zones, et cetera, are more resilient. They have a plan already. They know they're going to have to shut down their office in Florida for a week every year because there's likely to be a Gulf hurricane that's going to affect them. And they can just put that plan in place. When the pandemic hit, everybody pulled their emergency plan out for disasters because everybody had to work from home in a hurricane, or everybody had to work from home in an earthquake in San Francisco, for example, or here in British Columbia. So take those disaster recovery plans that you've created for natural disasters and repurpose them into ransomware response plans, and they work incredibly well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I think that highlights this this topic of resiliency on other industries. Again, I'm sorry for beating a dead horse, right? But when you look at a plane, you would expect it to fly on a reduced number of turbines that are working. Or when you look at a ship, like the Titanic in theory was expected to be flooded to a certain percentage and things would still work out. They would still be able to make it to the shore. I think there's also a lack of recognition that we need to employ these mechanisms because, again, we're still critical infrastructure, even though we're information systems or like on the information economy. These things have a fundamental impact on everybody's well-being, and we need to start budgeting or disaster strategies accordingly.
Thank you so much. Aravind?
Yeah, I mean, everybody pointed out that backups, like basically the resiliency. I agree with it. The fact that the critical infrastructure is not backed up, that's kind of points out to the initial question, like the organizations are missing the very basic thing that they should follow. And other thing, I don't know, I want to ask everyone here. So like moving the infrastructure to cloud, does that provide us with the automated backup mechanism so that we don't need to worry about backup if we deploy all our infrastructure as microservices on Amazon? Like now, can we be free of this backup business? Can we be safe about, or like, can we not worry about ransomware anywhere, anytime? Like, what do you guys think about that? Is cloud the way to go to avoid having this backups?
I think you still need. Go ahead, Chester. Sorry.
I was going to say the criminals typically have administrative rights, so they just log into your cloud and delete everything.
Yeah.
So that isn't necessarily great either, right? This is why backups are actually a problem. A lot of organizations have backups and they're using things like Veeam or other commercial backup solutions, and then they use Amazon S3 as the backend, or Backblaze or Azure in order to store their backups. The problem is those are online backups, and if the criminal has administrative rights, they just go delete them, right? And so people that did IT when I was coming up in IT back in the 90s, and I had to like haul the tapes home every night so that they would be off site from the office when we were done doing tape backups. Turns out that'd be great right now, because if those backups are offline, then they can't be deleted by the criminal. But the problem is most organizations are either backing up to live hard disks that are hooked to the SAN, or they're backing up to a cloud provider, and those online backups are simply wiped out by the crooks. The benefit, though, of cloud, I think, is it's moved more organizations towards a zero trust approach, which we talked a little bit in the fireside chat with Spaff earlier. And we all have known for a long time that zero trust concept is the way forward. But I think the adoption of it's being driven by the cloud now. As soon as you move your authentication into Azure Active Directory, and as soon as you move your email into Gmail, and you start moving your CRM into Salesforce, the idea of these isolated systems having their own authentication and protection and authorization rules just kicks in automatically, right? Rather than I logged into the network, now I get everything, which is our old model, right? So there are huge advantages, I think, conceptually moving to the cloud that provides a bit of a higher level of security consciousness and modern security, but it doesn't necessarily help with the backup problem.
I agree very strongly with offsite backup. I think other than being an operational nightmare, this would be perhaps the best thing that you can do to protect yourself from ransomware. I also wonder if the use of stuff like data diodes and like write-only backups could also help. But overall, I don't know if I'm just old school, but I think offsite backups that you can physically control are just the best thing you can do.
I think it's a really interesting question, because one could make a strong case that traversal from local admin rights on an infected Windows machine to get in the cloud credentials to actually modify the backup strategy is a big jump, and there are many opportunities to stop that jump. It's not going to be an obvious, easy jump in many cases. So you may get a window of protection. I think if everyone was doing that, the criminals would, as Chester says, adjust their behavior to watch for it. So the moment the criminals can be very successful without being too sophisticated. So there's an opportunity for being, as I always say, not the slowest rabbit, being a little faster and avoiding the commodity attack strategy. If you are big and important and you're facing a dedicated hacker, they'll do the reconnaissance to work their way through and mitigate that.
Well, all it takes, the ones that are falling victim, Simon, are the ones that are integrating Active Directory as their authentication. Right, so their backup solution in the cloud, once they've got the domain admin, these guys aren't sophisticated enough to go separately find your Amazon credentials.
No.
They're just logging in with regular Windows credentials that, for their own convenience, IT departments have like made Windows authentication on all of their things, including their backups. So multi-factor would stop it every single time.
Yeah.
But nobody's using multi-factor. So like these are super simple solutions, like do the basics, turn multi-factor on, don't integrate Active Directory into your super admin rights in the cloud. All of those, any one of those things is enough to stop any of this from happening.
Well, thank you so much for the response. Yes, we always forget our basics. We always forget basics. We always make advancement in the technology infrastructure, but sometimes we are forgetting the basic. And one thing is, no system is 100% secure. So that's why we need to implement some kind of defense mechanism. So anytime our attack happens, we have a plan. As many panelists said, we need to have a good plan backup. So one is the backup. It has to be not on site, it has to be off site. So another recovery plan, we need to also focus on critical infrastructure. Let's move to another question. Another question is, in your opinion, what is the most important lesson learned from the recent high-profile ransomware attack? Anybody wants to take this one?
I would say paying doesn't guarantee recovery.
Yes.
Several attacks I've seen lately, people paid, nothing worked.
Yes.
Yeah, I have data on that. 8% of victims get all of their data back. The average victim gets 66% of their data back, and 33% of victims get less than half their data back.
So,
but 98% get some data back. So only 2% get nothing. But the criminals' decryption tools are buggy. Like, so if you do, I don't encourage anybody to pay the ransom, but if you pay the ransom, come to one of us vendors, we'll write a decryption tool that will work with their keys, whereas the one they provide you may not. And in the case of Colonial, apparently the restore tool after they paid the ransom was slower than restoring their backups. And so it kind of didn't do them any good. But my understanding, we don't personally do this at Sophos, but some of the vendors in our space will write you a custom decrypt tool that uses the keys that they gave you. And it's much more likely to be like multi-threaded and fast and this kind of stuff. The criminals do not, their QA is not good. And at best, their QA is only focused on the encryption, not the decryption.
Right.
And also, like, if you really pay them ransom, how sure that they will not come back to you, because they already got all the information there. So that's another important thing that they have to remember, that paying ransomware, it might not help them for the long
Usually
run.
it's a different ransom group that comes back the second time. I mean, when it does happen, I mean, there is a weird reputational situation with the criminals, which is they know that if word gets around that they say they're going to do something and they don't, then nobody's ever going to pay them ransom again. So there's this weird kind of mafia code of honor, I guess. But we've seen at least 2 or 3 victims hit twice, but it was always 2 different groups.
Yes, thank you.
Staffed by the same criminals.
Well, it could be, yeah, because I mean they're all affiliate based, right? So the idea is the affiliates move around between different ransomware networks, if you want to call it that.
Nope. I agree with Chester. We see terms and conditions of getting the key. Like the criminals will say, we would not attack you again, or for this much time, and we guarantee this, then the other. But it's as you say, as Chester says, it's an affiliate group. One group has done the reconnaissance, sold the data to some other group who've weaponized it, penetrated you. There's no guarantee that they won't come back and get you again.
And because of US sanctions and things, they keep changing names.
Yeah.
So one week they're dark matter, and the next week they're black matter, and the week after that there's something else. So they're trying to.
I hope they're not dark matter. That's a real company.
Oh, sorry. I'm using the wrong. My apologies to dark matter if they're listening.
Okay.
Well, I think a common pattern here is that most of them are uninteresting. There's a talk by Alex Stamos on using security in 2019. But for as much as we want the hacking to be like Hollywood, like somebody's like breaking into the Pentagon, they're just finding a paste bin with your password, using some like very badly written set script to parse through large amounts of data, and then they start stuffing it into a bunch of places. They realize that you have horrible password practices, and they go from there, which is what makes it very, very frustrating in that for as much research as we can have and identifying new ways to detect all of this, we have been seeing this happen over and over again on the like most basic common denominator, like password stuffing, phishing, a malicious PowerPoint file about puppies, stuff like that. And yeah, I think that's why it also calls for like maybe a stepping back on and rethinking things a little bit.
I mean, most roads end in multi-factor. Multi-factor would thwart 99% of these attacks. Like, I'd love to sell you some anti-ransomware stuff, but you'd be better off implementing multi-factor, like just flat across the board. Most effective.
It helps with not only ransomware, right? It helps with a bunch of other
yeah,
things.
I mean, it's just, the end result is these criminals need administrative rights to do what they're doing. They can't turn off the antivirus if they don't have admin. They can't steal the most important files that are locked up in the file share for finance if they don't have admin. Like, if you simply put MFA on your admin, this all stops.
So, and like, what is the barrier to like deploy multi-factor authentication in organizations? Like, why are they not doing it?
I forgot my keys at work and I don't want to have to go back and get them. I don't know.
It's interesting to see, like, although we know the solution is simple, like the organizations don't try to enforce this, right?
Well, I think it's as similar as a backup question, right? It's just an operational add-on, and a lot of this time you're really running on a tight budget, and you don't have the time to be asking people to do these things. And sometimes it's just looked at as a something that's restricting you from doing your work rather than part and parcel of doing your work. I think in a sense, all of this like challenges almost stop being technical and start being a little bit more the regulatory side of things and the cultural development side of things. And if we want it to be technical, maybe it's on the HCI side of things, right? I hand my developers in my lab now, I hand a UV key. And now I say, like, take this thing, follow this like 5-step guide. I don't want you to commit to the repo until you do that. And that does change things a lot compared to, like, say, oh, download this phone app and scan this QR code, and then you change your phone and whatever. And it's just like a different level on the conversation, I think.
Well, thank you so much. I do have more questions, but the time is 3:47. We need to open the floor to get the question from audience. If they don't have any question, then we'll continue with the question that I have. So now we are opening the floor to our audience. Folks in the audience, please share your questions and comments with the panel via the chat function.
Here for questions, we're using the Q&A section, and there is a question in there.
Okay.
So
Here,
shall I
I
start
can-
with that one, the disclosureware question? So the question
what
is
are your-
about,
Perfect.
Sorry,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Simon.
Sure.
the question to us about the thoughts on disclosureware, we call it, where a criminal takes your data, encrypts your copy of it, and then threatens to share their copy with the rest of the world. So blackmail again. Yeah, hideous, evil, not something socially acceptable. But I come back to my position statement is I don't think you should be able to buy your way out of problems. Like, if it's happened, it's happened. Your data is already owned by criminals. There's no guarantee they will delete it. It will exist on the dark web for eternity. I think paying is, I keep saying it, is not as socially, it doesn't seem to be an ethical choice for me.
I will comment on it as well with that. Almost all the groups do this now. They're going to post the data largely, and I agree with Simon on the paying. But we had one victim that turned it to their advantage, which was they couldn't afford to pay, and they waited for the criminals to publish their data on the dark web so they could download it and get their data back. So at least that worked out for that particular victim. I mean, if you're law abiding, you have to disclose that this attack happened, even if the criminals don't publish it. So you're not really saving yourself anything. And by the numbers again, ransom is typically only 1/10 of your cost of recovery, whether you pay the ransom or not. So the average recovery in the US is $1.8 million per event. The average ransom in the US is $175,000 per event. So it turns out the extra 1.7 million or 1.6 million that it costs exists whether you pay the ransom or not, because to Simon saying, say you burn down the building, that's what you have to do anyway. The criminals have compromised your network. You have to burn it all down and build it all over again, no matter whether you pay the ransom or not. So all you're really doing is funding criminal activity when you're paying the ransom, is assuming you have backups. And I'll never blame a victim for what they choose to do, but if we keep paying the ransom, this is never going to end.
I would be very proud to do business with a company who said, we got hit by ransomware and we refuse to pay. This is disruptive. Please bear with us. Like a company that took the high moral ground and said, we are not participating in this. I would consider them highly worthy of my business. I really would. And I would hope as a community, we applaud people who stand up and act ethically, and we support them through transitions. You know, we shouldn't be condemning people for making good choices, even if they made poor risk decisions that got them hit in the first place.
Yep, I agree with you. We should never pay ransom to any criminals, because they will form like other activities, other criminal activities. I agree with you. We have the second question here. Anybody would like to take the second question? That's a pretty interesting question.
I can explain why I think we don't know, which is the past problems, as we discussed earlier in the conversation, were around collecting money. And so we kept playing whack-a-mole, moving them around from one scam to the next scam to the next scam to the next scam, because they had to keep finding new ways of collecting money. After credit cards were cut off, they used these green dot money pack cards you buy at 7-Eleven or Walgreens. And then, once they started putting warning on things, then they started doing Western Union, and then Western Union started patrolling their wire transfers better. And like, we were chasing them around and they kept going next scam. I don't think there is a next scam after ransomware. As long as we have cryptocurrency and as long as people keep paying it, there's just no reason for this to end. And this is the longest trend I've ever seen in my career. I mean, I've been working in security since the mid-90s, and it's always changed every 18 months based on, okay, we fixed this thing, now what's the next thing, right? Like, we started using firewalls, so worms kind of died off. So we started attacking browsers. So we killed Java plugin and Flash plugin, and then they stopped attacking browsers, right? We keep getting better. We are getting better, right? We're like 90% or more encrypted websites now. Like, all the work we're doing truly matters and has made the world considerably more secure. But this is an Achilles heel. As long as this cryptocurrency problem exists, this problem isn't going to change.
Chester, where do you stand on the destruction we're seeing, where criminals are threatening to permanently break hardware using EUEFI and firmware attacks? So the threat isn't just disclosure of data or ransom. It's like, if you don't pay, I'm going to destroy your irrecoverably destroy your IT infrastructure.
We haven't seen anyone do it. So as far as I'm aware, it's a toothless threat at the moment, but there's obviously nothing stopping them per se. There are security mechanisms around updating UEFI firmware from within the guest operating system of the computer. However, we also have seen Dell, Lenovo, and others have massive flaws in their BIOS update code that have been disclosed in the last 12 months that the right criminal with the right technical skill, there's nothing stopping them, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
And it's really hard to defend against, like, software that can detect ransomware and stuff. I'm not sure could be effective at protecting firmware in that capacity if it's a vulnerability in the OEM's system.
So I will say that from an academic standpoint, I think ransomware is not going to end, because it's almost like a means to an end, rather than a particular attack vector or way to infiltrate the network. Something that we're seeing a trend, and I think it should be brought up more prominently, is that software supply chain attacks are also on the rise, and we're starting to see combinations of these, where people actually attack the software delivery pipeline to hack a consumer. That was the case of SolarWinds. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing essentially these two ideas come together, in which somebody hacks SolarWinds to essentially make a ransomware over the FDA or the CDC or something like that. And this would be extremely devastating, because they can actually get into more high-profile targets that may have proper mechanisms in place to protect against the old school. I sent an email with a phishing link on it.
Well, that was kind of the Kaseya attack, right? I mean, the vulnerability in Kaseya led to pretty much all of the downstream victims getting implanted, despite them not necessarily even have done anything wrong.
Right.
That's a super tough one. Software supply chain is incredibly weak.
Mhm.
We have another kind of follow-up question or more clarification. So question is, do you have any specific best practice recommendation for making your data less valuable to bad guys who threaten disclosure?
I mean, the person disclosure that asked the question also was saying about, encryption of their databases and files. Obviously, encryption is great if you can implement it successfully. The problem is the criminals likely will have the keys if they've gotten administrative rights again. So it's really about stopping them from getting control of everything at the top. The other thing to keep in mind is a lot of things are difficult to encrypt that are still good extortion tools, like your email. They are reading your email. I didn't mention this in any of the earlier stuff, but just as a tip to anyone, if they are victimized by these guys, they're watching all your communications. So you have to go out of band and have a plan to go out of band. They're reading your email. So if you're if you're talking about snuffing them and not paying the ransom in email, they're reading your email and they're just going to nuke your stuff. You need to be talking on the phone or over text messages or WhatsApp, or you got to have some kind of plan to talk out of band with your service providers, with your coworkers, because once you're compromised, they're going to use your own communications against you. And so to Alex's question, I mean, my concern would be, even if you encrypt files and databases and things, email is always somewhat open access to employees and almost needs to be for the way we all communicate today. So they will try to use that against you as well. So perhaps telling your employees not to use email for illegal activity and password sharing and talking about how they're discriminating against someone or something would be a great idea.
I think to add to that, I forget what the example was, but I remember there was a high-profile ransomware attack, I think last year, that the hackers realized that the information of them being hacked was enough for them to speculate on the stocks of that company itself. So they are very, very clever, and they're really just trying to figure out what they can make what they got. So it is hard to outsmart people that are just trying to make this their living with just a random afterthought.
I guess the challenge is they have more experience at this than you, right? You're not their first victim, and they've been through this a few times, and they know what the insurance company negotiator is going to say. They know what you're going to do to stall, to buy time, to decide whether you're going to pay the ransom. They know the tells of somebody who's going to pay and somebody who isn't, and that's unfortunate for the victims, which is why I think having an outside firm of some sort help you in these types of incidents is essential, because they also have experience working with these criminals, and that does give you at least some even playing ground while you figure out how to save your business.
And that sounds like a wonderful spot to wrap up this panel discussion. Thank you to all of our panelists and our moderator. Obviously an interesting conversation.